We're the social ninjas. Today we have a very special situation. It's just me today, and I have a very special guest, Emmy. How are you doing, Emmy?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. And for those who don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So my name's Emmy Brunner. I'm a psychotherapist and I own an organisation in the UK called the Recover Clinic. And we initially set up as an outpatient service in London. And we've since expanded internationally into an online service as well. And we really believe in a holistic model of treatment and helping people to fully recover from mental health issues. And we're really passionate about believing that a full recovery is possible for almost everybody.
That's amazing. The first question I have is holistic. Sticks out for
hmm
me. So how would
I guess,
you, yeah.
yeah. I mean, for me, I think the mistake with a lot of treatment is applying kind of any sort of rigid system when you're trying to work with human beings, and treating a set of symptoms separately rather than looking at the bigger picture and thinking about what somebody needs, body, mind, soul, like the whole package. And I think when you can step back and see somebody and get some context for what they're going through, I think it means that you're in a much better position to be able to support their healing journey rather than kind of just focusing on minimizing symptoms or, a certain kind of fraction of what might be going on for them.
Wow, that's so you think so I heard you say is a symptom. I heard symptom. So like you think it's most mainstream mental health organizations kind of just focus on symptoms?
I think that's true for a lot of people. Yeah. I think because that's the impetus that takes us into seeking help. So we're really anxious, or we're depressed, or our OCD is bad, or we have an eating disorder. And for me, that there are symptoms of a problem and strategies that have evolved, that have become problematic for a person, rather than the problem itself. And that can be quite frustrating to hear, I think, when you're suffering with any one of those things, because it does feel so all encompassing. But I think the trick, if you like, is to not be blindsided by the set of symptoms, because when you kind of scratch beneath the surface, you recognize that actually there are issues across lots of different areas of a person's life. It's just often that one that's making the most noise, if you like. And when you cannot be too distracted by that and provide a more holistic view of a person, and make the healing experience much more of a general process, I think that's what works.
Cool. Yeah, so my question would be, how did you get into that? Is there something you went through that was very challenging or?
I went. I had mental health issues as a young person. I struggled with my relationship with food and my body, and had really bad anxiety and OCD, and kind of there's a long old list there that I could keep on going through. And I never really had the support that I needed. I didn't know what I needed, certainly, and I didn't really understand that I wasn't well either. I really attributed a lot of my behaviors and symptoms to character traits, which just reinforced a sense of shame that I felt anyway. And I think when I managed to stabilize my behaviors, I started to train as a clinician. And I started working in a 12-step inpatient recovery center. And I recognized there were elements of the 12-step community that were incredibly healing for people. But I felt that just the coming together and being in a group was the healing aspect more than anything else. And that
Oh,
actually, if you were able to facilitate community healing for people, then that was going to accelerate their healing. But that there was something being overlooked, and that was very much this emphasis on symptom minimization, harm minimization, rather than thinking actually what's going on at the core for this person, and what's that deep rooted problem that needs to be resolved.
wow. So you didn't know anything else really. You just characterized it as this is a character trait. This is who I am, and then you went through. It sounds like you went through
Yeah, I
this.
just totally. I just thought I was a bit nuts. I was just like, I just find the world difficult to be in. I just find it hard to function, and I I engage in relationships with people that aren't very pleasant, and that feels pretty bad. I didn't really consider that there was any sort of underlying motivation or unconscious motivation to do that. And I didn't recognize, I didn't know what trauma was. I didn't have a language to communicate what was going on for me. I didn't have a space to communicate what was going on for me. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I don't think we have that insight into our own experience to be able to communicate what's happening for us. But I think when we gain it, just that insight can be so helpful.
So you have that insight, and then how did you go about healing it?
I think I read basically everything that I could read. I just searched out anybody that I thought felt good and just intuitively felt right to me, and read and read and read and read, and spent a long time kind of cross-referencing things and thinking about what I was doing. I was working in a therapeutic setting at that point, so I was able to take a step back and look at what was working for people and what wasn't. And then I left and set up my own clinical practice, which has obviously grown into what the Recover Clinic is today. But initially, it was just me seeing clients, and I felt that what was most helpful for people, aside from the clinical training I had, was that I was able to empathize very deeply, because of my own experiences, and I was prepared to share something about myself with my clients. And my experience of working with therapists is that they never did that. I never knew who they were. I never knew what their experiences had been. And there was almost a kind of this opaque view of them where they were slightly removed, and there felt like an imbalance. And by working clinical practice myself, I tried to readdress that and sort of show up and be with my clients as a companion on a journey rather than trying to control their journey or dictate their journey. And that seemed to work much more effectively.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. I've had it where there's this like I'm above you. There's that energy shift
Yeah,
when like I'm on your team.
yeah,
I know I feel you.
yeah. I think there's real value, and I think what we all want, and at times find it excruciating also, but what we want is to be seen and to be heard, and to show up for a person and be prepared to do that and sit in the darkness with them rather than trying to drag them out is a harder and more valuable thing to do. Um, and that's been really at the grounding of the work that I've done, and it's why I try and share so much, about healing and trying to educate people about how they can heal themselves, because I don't like this kind of hierarchical or removed, aloof sense of, clinicians and everybody else, and we hold all the power. It sits very uncomfortably with me, because we're all just human beings, and we're just doing the best that we can. And if we've learned ways of doing that effectively, then I think it's a good thing to share those.
Beautiful. So if a listener right now is thinking, "Oh, she said self healing. That sounds amazing. How could I heal myself?" What are some great tips?
I think for me, like the crux of any self healing is about trying to establish a compassionate relationship with ourselves, because our frailties of being a human being are that we struggle, and they are that we are injured emotionally and we feel pain, and we can either be tolerant and compassionate of that and know that that is what it is to be a human being, or we can be very intolerant of that. And my experience myself and of working with people is that whenever they experience that vulnerability or connect with that vulnerability in themselves, is that they're extremely critical of themselves, extremely intolerant, irritated with their inability to kind of steer themselves on a perfect path. And I think once you let go of that and recognize actually what it is to be a human being is beautiful, but it's light and dark, and it's, by letting go of that control, you're really able to welcome in an intimacy that's just not possible when you're walking that other path.
Wow, it makes me think of myself. I know I don't like to talk too much about myself, but just today, even I was really, I like really wanted to interview you, and at the last second, Kyle couldn't make it, and I got all this anxiety. And in the beginning, I wasn't very confident, and like just you saying that, like, old me would have been so hard on myself. Like, why aren't you showing up so perfectly? But realistically, it's been a very long time since I've done an interview with just myself, so it's realistic that I'm of course going to have those like butterflies and say, "Hey, Jeremy,
Yeah, yeah. It's the meanings that we attach to those experiences that actually injure us more than the experiences themselves. You know, when we feel anxious about something and we can meet that trepidation with compassion and kindness, then it's not a problem. It's our response to it that becomes problematic. And I think the more compassionate, it's literally for me the answer to everything. If you've got a problem, that's probably going to be my response. Like, how kind can you be to yourself about this? Because if you're showing up for yourself and you're being sweet and kind to yourself, then it doesn't really matter whatever it is. And that's kind of like the secret that no one tells you.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
How kind can you be to yourself?
Yeah, that's a
With
good one.
how kind, how uh, how kind can you be to yourself about this or with
Yeah,
this?
how kind can I, how compassionate can I be? And for a lot of people, when they're very entrenched in speaking to themselves in a very unkind way, and they've got a very well established, what I call an unwell voice, internal narrative that's extremely critical, it can be really hard to even think about how to be compassionate. And under those circumstances, I'd say to you to think of someone you love and what would you say to them? And people always find the words then. You know, I tell them not to worry, I tell them to, you know, it's going to be okay, and they manage to find the words of compassion. And when the rules apply to everybody else but you, then you know that you can't trust them. You know, that's when you know that unwell voice is in charge and calling the shots. So if you find that voice of compassion, you turn that towards yourself, then even if it feels like funky and weird because you're not used to it, just stick with it and keep doing it until it doesn't feel weird anymore.
Man, I just want to give myself a hug.
Yeah, that's it. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
So, can you take us through like the process of someone comes to your organization? Like
Yeah, I mean,
the journey, a little bit of the journey.
for sure, for sure. So straight away, we don't have a set program that somebody's going to do because it depends on who you are and not just what your diagnosis might be or the symptoms you might have, but what you like, what you don't like. You know, if somebody comes to me and I can see they're super cerebral and they're overthinking everything and they've done the therapy and they've got the talk, then I'm thinking, how can we connect with this person creatively? How can we get them to use a different part of their mind and body in a creative sense for them to open up a part of themselves that they're maybe really unfamiliar with? And in the same way that if I meet somebody who's a bit more connected to themselves in that way but struggles to have a more of a verbal narrative, then we're gonna shift things to see if we can connect with that person in that way. I think for me what's really important is you're meeting person to person and really trying to see the person, rather than a set of symptoms or a diagnosis that somebody's had. I find that particularly unhelpful. And sometimes people say, "Oh, what's my diagnosis?" I'm like, I can tell you what the DSM might say about you, but it doesn't tell me much about you. And what I know is that these are symptoms that you've established in response to trauma. That's something I'm always confident about. And that doesn't mean you need to go into your trauma. It doesn't mean you need to unpack it, but it does mean that if you can stop associating these symptoms as character traits, then you'll find compassion in there somewhere. I think that's where community is so healing. When you can see and witness other people taking risks and being vulnerable, it gives us confidence and strength to go there ourselves.
Yeah, I do a lot of group meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and when someone shares something vulnerable, I feel so much like safer, and I just feel better about myself and I trust them more. Just only pros, but is also just within that, it's a safe, has to be a safe container. You know, I feel like there is a level of oversharing. I remember when I first started being vulnerable, I would just like be vulnerable everywhere I went, and it wasn't
Mhm.
it wasn't the best situation, but just the power of vulnerability is it's powerful to
Yeah,
me.
and I think it can be easy to confuse being vulnerable with not having boundaries. So I think showing up and being vulnerable is different from being in a place and feeling very exposed because you've maybe shared too much prematurely. And I feel like sometimes that unwell voice sets us up to either do one of those two things, to either be completely defended and not share anything, or to overshare so that it can then chastise us for doing that and to shame us for doing that. So I think it's a bit of a setup. So part of it is about navigating the situation and waiting till you feel comfortable and confident to slowly start to share more and more with of yourself with people that you have come to know and to trust. And that just takes a little bit of time.
Beautiful. So I have a question. Say someone comes to you in a session and they're just overwhelmed or overstimulated, and they're just, what do you do to help them?
In terms of their sharing, or they just kind of up here
Yeah. How do you
like
get them?
hi. Okay, so part of it, there's some grounding exercises that you can do, literally putting your feet on the floor. We use a lot of physical things in the clinic, like crystals and Play-Doh and stuff that helps you connect with your body again, because when we're in that hyper stimulated state, what we need is grounding. So by connecting to anything physical, that really, really helps. In extreme situations, you can go outside, like literally take your shoes and socks off and ground your feet on the floor if that's possible and appropriate. Um, it's just about thinking about the person and what they might need from you in that moment. I've sat on the floor. I've come out of my chair and sat on the floor with clients, and sometimes having clients lay on their back and raise their kind of butt up, it slows your heart rate down, slows your blood pressure down, and can make you feel a lot calmer. So it depends. Some people have that hyper arousal creates a lot of thinking and a lot of racing thoughts. And for some people, so for me, it wasn't that I was worried about anything. It was always in my body. It was my body that was reacting and panicking. So I could remain kind of measured in my mind, but my body was freaking out, kind of thing. So for me, anything that was physically grounding was really helpful. We use a lot of weighted blankets as well. So sometimes putting a weighted blanket around you, literally feeling like it's weighing you down, can be really comforting for some people.
Yeah.
But I
That's,
think playing around with things and seeing what works for you, and not following somebody else's rules. Well, this worked for them and therefore it should work for me. And if it doesn't, then that's my issue. It's like
something's wrong
actually,
with me.
yeah, just exploring different things and finding what works for you is so key, I think, in being balanced and well.
Hmm. I'm curious, do you have a specific like morning routine that like you would prescribe? It's talking about
I would
prescriptions.
never, well, I'm very kind of anti-prescriptive
I know so too.
well-being. But what works for me is that I meditate every day, and I try and do that in the morning, but I have two small children and that's not always possible. Um, where it isn't possible, it happens sometimes later in the morning, but it happens every day. And I also journal every day. I think for me, what's really key is flexibility, because I have two kids, I run a big business, and um, my well-being is my number one priority. So no matter what else is going on in my day, those things will happen. Other things may not, and other things may slide, but they will happen because they're so crucial to my um, well-being and my sense of balance. But that's what's worked for me, and it took a while to explore different things to see what worked for me. I love running now as well. Like I never would have run like years ago, and I think if I checked, there's just no way you could have had me do that. And No, it's something I really love. And I think as I've got older, I've been more tolerant. My lifestyle's changed and things change. I think being willing to kind of go with the flow and not get too rigid about how it should be is a good thing to do.
Yeah, it resonates with me a lot. Like you have the plan is this, and if anything goes shifts in any ways, then no, it's not.
Yeah, yeah. And that unwell voice is there waiting when that happens. And I think that's why being flexible, you can prioritize your well-being and still be flexible about how you take care of yourself, and be forgiving when things just don't kind of plan out, because I guarantee they won't always plan out the way you want them to. And you just got to go, well, hey, there it is, there's life happening. um, and find another way to give yourself what you need in that moment.
I'm just gonna ask this because it's kind of been my kick a lot in my life. And if someone asks you, "Hey, Emmy, I want to love myself more," what would you tell them?
I would say, first of all, I'm always curious what people are doing to get there, to get to that space. I think a lot of people go from a place of feeling real self-loathing to trying to love themselves, and that is a mountain to climb. And I think my experience and what I try and encourage our clients to do is to find a place of acceptance. And I think in a space of acceptance, we can plant some really good seeds for self love. But I think quite often people really try and make that leap. And I think it goes back to what I was saying about that unwell voice, just setting ourselves up to fail. And I think when we bring the goalposts a little bit closer and we're able to focus on, actually, I'm going to accept myself, we come to realize that a place of acceptance really is a place of self love as well. We're no longer striving, fighting, aspiring. We're just going, I'm okay as I am today. And one of my mantras for a really long time was, I'm good enough. I'm good enough. And I don't know what the end of that sentence was, but I'm just good enough. This is okay. It's not perfect. It's not amazing. And then good enough became something pretty amazing and pretty good. And I this idea now, when I think about what self-love is, I think it's just being connected with something within myself, greater than myself. I don't know if it's about looking in the mirror every day going, oh my God, you're amazing, or I smashed that today, and not finding fault with yourself ever. I think it's just having a kind of constant sense of being connected to your own knowing, whatever that is for you. And that's a lot more achievable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so true. There's like just getting that win, getting those wins, and I see it all the times when like I work with clients and they want to do all so much so quickly, and then they want to go from 0 to 80 miles an hour in a second, and I'm like, well, hold on, let's just concentrate on getting a win. They want to go
Mhm.
from let me meditate every single day, and I'm like, well, what's the last time you meditated? See, I did. Where are they now?
Exactly.
I've
Yeah.
never I've never meditated, so that's not a realistic win. So then they say they meditate 2 times of the next 7 days, and then all of a sudden they don't do the whole week, and they feel terrible about themselves. I'm like,
Yeah.
you just meditated twice and you haven't done it in a while. That's a 200% gain.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And I think so much of the time we can go into space of failure before we've even begun. I was speaking to a friend of mine actually recently who was having sort of a really bad couple of weeks, and she was saying, I really feel like I'm failing. I really feel like I want to give up. And I was like, what have you invested in yourself in this last 6 months? What have you invested in taking care of yourself? She was like, well, nothing. I was like, well, there you go. As soon as we start investing in ourselves and our well-being, then things start to shift and start to feel better. I think it's not about setting ourselves unrealistic goals, um, or goals that we're just with unrealistic time frames. It's just taking things a bit slower and being a bit more gentle with ourselves. It just comes back again, I think, to compassion for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. If you had one message for the world, what would that message be?
Oh, just stop giving yourself such a hard time. Um, we're all here. We're all connected, and I think when we think about what we want, we're so similar despite our differences, and we're encouraged to think of the world in such a fractious place. And actually, no matter who we are or where we come from, we all want love, we all want peace, we all want safety. And I think when we can connect on those kind of commonalities rather than seeking out the differences between us and getting into a place of conflict, I don't see much productive, positive, productive outcomes from that. I feel like when we connect, when we reach out and find the common ground, that's when good things happen. And I think from a mental health perspective, stop telling yourself this story that this is who you are. These are experiences that you're having. They don't have to define you, and you can be who you want to be.
I love that so much. It's like, thank you so much for hanging out with me for a little bit.
Oh, that's such a pleasure. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Oh, if someone wants to find you on social media, before I forget, where can they find you?
Emmy Brunner Official is my Instagram handle.
Perfect. Thank you.